Have you ever imagined what it would be like to be the child of a divine promise? Someone whose birth was marked by a miracle and whose life stood at the center of God's grand plans. Isaac, one of the most intriguing figures in the Bible, lived exactly that. His story is filled with intense moments, from the near sacrifice on Mount Moriah to family conflicts that shaped the destiny of generations. Get ready to embark on a journey full of faith challenges and surprising twists. Let's uncover the complete story of Isaac together. The beginning of Isaac's story is deeply intertwined with the faith journey of his parents, Abraham and Sarah. From the outset, the Bible emphasizes that Isaac would be the fulfillment of a divine promise, something that would transcend the natural to demonstrate God's faithfulness. His story begins many years before his birth, in a calling that changed Abraham's life. In Genesis chapter 12, God calls Abram, Abraham's name before it was changed by God, to leave his homeland and go to a land that God would show him. At that moment, God makes a powerful promise. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. Genesis 12:2. This marks the beginning of God's covenant with Abraham, but the fulfillment of this promise seemed distant, as Abraham and his wife Sarai, later renamed Sarah, were childless. Abraham was 75 years old when he received this promise, and as the years passed with no sign of children, he questioned God in Genesis 15, saying, "Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless? And the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus." Genesis 15:2. However, God reassures him, saying that his heir would come from his own body. In Genesis 15:5, God takes Abraham outside and says, "Look up at the sky and count the stars. If indeed you can count them, so shall your offspring be." Abraham believed the Lord, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Genesis 15:6. Despite this, the delay in the promise's fulfillment began to create doubt. In Genesis chapter 16, Sarai, advanced in age, suggests that Abraham have a child with her servant Hagar, thinking this might be the way God intended to fulfill his promise. Hagar conceives and gives birth to Ishmael, but God makes it clear that Ishmael would not be the child of promise. In Genesis 17, God renews his covenant with Abraham and changes his name from Abram to Abraham, meaning father of many nations. He also changes Sarai's name to Sarah, meaning princess. God reaffirms that Sarah would bear a son despite her old age. In verses 15 to 19, God declares, "Your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you will call him Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him." Abraham laughs at this, as he is 99 years old and Sarah is 89. In Genesis chapter 18, 3 angelic visitors appear to Abraham, and one of them reiterates that Sarah would give birth to a son within a year. Sarah, overhearing this, laughs because it seems impossible due to her age. In verse 14, God asks, "Is anything too hard for the Lord?" This question not only reaffirms God's power, but also prepares the reader for the extraordinary event to come. Finally, in Genesis 21, the promise is fulfilled. The text states, "Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised." Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had promised him. Abraham gave the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore him. Genesis 21:1-3. Abraham was 100 years old, and Sarah was 90. The name Isaac, meaning laughter, is rich in symbolism. It serves as a reminder of Abraham and Sarah's initial laughter upon hearing the promise, but also reflects the joy of seeing God's plan fulfilled. In verse 6, Sarah declares, "God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me." After Isaac's birth, Abraham holds a great feast on the day Isaac is weaned, as recorded in Genesis 21:8. However, this moment of joy is accompanied by conflict. Sarah notices Ishmael, Hagar's son, mocking Isaac and demands that Abraham send Hagar and Ishmael away. In verse 10 she says, "Get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac." Though this distresses Abraham, God instructs him to listen to Sarah, assuring him that Ishmael will also become a great nation, but that his covenant will be established through Isaac. Thus Hagar and Ishmael depart, while Isaac remains the legitimate heir of Abraham, the child of the divine promise. The narrative of Isaac's birth not only demonstrates God's power and faithfulness, but also underscores the central theme of the divine covenant. Isaac represents the beginning of the fulfillment of promises that would culminate in the formation of the nation of Israel. Here begins the next chapter of his story, with Isaac growing up under the shadow of the divine promise that would shape his destiny and the history of his descendants. Few events in the Bible are as profound and meaningful as the sacrifice of Isaac on Mount Moriah. This episode not only reveals Abraham's unwavering obedience and faith, but also sheds light on God's plan for humanity's redemption. As the child of promise, Isaac stands at the center of this narrative, demonstrating his father's trust in God, even when faced with an incomprehensible request. In Genesis 22, the narrative begins with a striking statement. "And it came to pass after these things that God tested Abraham." Genesis 22:1. The word tested is significant as it indicates that God's request was a trial, a means to reveal the depth of Abraham's faith. God then gives Abraham a command that seems contrary to everything he had previously promised. "Take now your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains which I will tell you." Genesis 22:2. This command is heart-rending. Isaac was not only the long-awaited and beloved son, but also the heir to the divine promise. For Abraham, the idea of sacrificing Isaac seemed to jeopardize everything God had promised. Yet, the text records no hesitation. In verse 3, Abraham rises early, prepares his donkey, takes 2 of his servants and Isaac, and sets out for the place God indicated. The Bible does not mention Abraham's feelings or thoughts, but it is evident that he trusted God completely, even without understanding the purpose of the request. On the 3rd day of the journey, Abraham sees the place from afar. He then tells his servants, "Stay here with the donkey. The lad and I will go yonder and worship, and we will come back to you." Genesis 22:5. This declaration is remarkable, as it suggests that Abraham believed that somehow both he and Isaac would return. The author of Hebrews affirms this faith, stating that Abraham concluded that God was able to raise him up, even from the dead. Hebrews 11:19. With Isaac by his side, Abraham takes the wood for the offering and places it on his son's shoulders, while he himself carries the fire and the knife. The following scene is deeply moving. In verse 7, Isaac breaks the silence, asking, "My father, look, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering?" Abraham responds with a phrase that echoes through the ages. "My son, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering." Genesis 22:8. This response not only reflects Abraham's trust, but also foreshadows the future sacrifice of Jesus Christ, the Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world. When they arrive at the designated place, Abraham builds the altar, arranges the wood, binds Isaac, and lays him on the altar. The text does not mention any resistance from Isaac, suggesting that he, like his father, demonstrated submission and faith. As Abraham reaches out his hand to take the knife and slay his son, an angel of the Lord calls to him from heaven, saying, "Abraham, Abraham, do not lay your hand on the lad or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." Genesis 22:11-12. At this climactic moment, God intervenes and provides a substitute. Abraham looks up and sees a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. He takes the ram and offers it as a burnt offering in place of his son. In verse 14, Abraham names the place, "The Lord will provide," reflecting not only his personal experience, but also the greater truth that God always provides for the needs of his people. After this test of faith, God reaffirms his covenant with Abraham. In verse 16, the Lord declares, "By myself I have sworn, says the Lord, because you have done this thing, and have not withheld your son, your only son. Blessing I will bless you, and multiplying I will multiply your descendants as the stars of the heaven and as the sand on the seashore. And your descendants shall possess the gate of their enemies. In your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice." Genesis 22:16-18. This moment marks the climax of Abraham and Isaac's story on Mount Moriah. Abraham's obedience and his willingness to offer God what was most precious to him reveal a faith that fully trusts in God's character, even when his actions seem inexplicable. Similarly, Isaac emerges as a figure of submission and trust, foreshadowing the future sacrifice of Jesus Christ, who would be both the obedient son and the substitute lamb. After this event, Abraham and Isaac return to the servants, as Abraham had predicted at the beginning of the journey, and together they go back to Beersheba, where they remain for some time. This return marks the continuation of Isaac's story, now bearing not only the weight of being the son of promise, but also the experience of having participated in one of the most significant acts of faith and obedience by his father. It is in this continuity that Isaac's story advances, his life marked by God's care and the inheritance of the divine promise. The story of Isaac and Rebekah's marriage is not merely a narrative of matrimonial union, but a clear example of divine providence in action. This event, recounted in Genesis 24, underscores the importance of trusting God, fervent prayer, and obedience to his will, highlighting how every step was guided by the Lord to fulfill his purposes. By this time, Abraham, advanced in age, grows concerned about Isaac's future. He knows that Isaac's marriage is crucial for the continuation of the divine covenant, and therefore he does not want Isaac to marry a woman from the surrounding nations. At the beginning of Genesis 24, Abraham summons his most trusted servant, likely Eliezer of Damascus, and gives specific instructions. "You shall not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I dwell, but you shall go to my country and to my family, and take a wife for my son Isaac." Genesis 24:3-4. This concern demonstrates Abraham's faithfulness to God's covenant and his commitment to keeping Isaac's lineage separate from the idolatrous practices of the Canaanite nations. Abraham demands that his servant take an oath by placing his hand under Abraham's thigh, a gesture symbolizing the seriousness of the commitment. He also assures the servant that God will send his angel ahead to ensure the mission's success. "The Lord, the God of heaven, who brought me out of my father's household and my native land, and who spoke to me and promised me on oath, saying, 'To your offspring I will give this land. He will send his angel before you, so that you can get a wife for my son from there.'" Genesis 24:7. With the mission clearly outlined, the servant sets off for the city of Nahor in Mesopotamia, taking with him 10 camels and various gifts as symbols of wealth and goodwill. Upon reaching the city outskirts, he stops near a well in the evening, the time when women would typically come to draw water. At this pivotal moment, the story takes on a deeply spiritual tone as the servant turns to prayer, seeking God's guidance in completing his task. In verse 12, the servant prays, "Lord, God of my master Abraham, make me successful today and show kindness to my master Abraham." He requests a specific sign to identify the right woman. May it be that when I say to a young woman, 'Please let down your jar that I may have a drink,' and she says, 'Drink, and I'll water your camels too,' let her be the one you have chosen for your servant Isaac." Genesis 24:14. This prayer is not just a plea for guidance, but also a demonstration of total dependence on God for the mission's success. Before he finishes praying, Rebekah appears. Genesis 24:15-16 describes her as very beautiful, a virgin. No man had ever slept with her. She is the daughter of Bethuel, the granddaughter of Nahor, Abraham's brother. When the servant asks for water, she promptly responds, "Drink, my lord." Then she adds, "I'll draw water for your camels too, until they have had enough to drink." Genesis 24:18-19. This detail is significant as it reveals Rebekah's generous and hard-working character. The servant watches in silence as Rebekah fulfills the task, confirming in his heart that God has answered his prayer. When everything happens exactly as he had asked God, the servant bows down and worships the Lord, saying, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not abandoned his kindness and faithfulness to my master. As for me, the Lord has led me on the journey to the house of my master's relatives." Genesis 24:27. The servant then gives Rebekah gifts, including a gold nose ring and bracelets, and inquires about her family. When Rebekah reveals that she is the daughter of Bethuel and granddaughter of Nahor, the servant realizes that God has not only answered his prayer, but has also guided him directly to Abraham's family. He is invited to Bethuel's house, where he meets Rebekah's brother Laban, who welcomes him warmly. The servant recounts the entire story to Rebekah's family, from Abraham's oath to the prayer at the well and the encounter with Rebekah. He emphasizes that his mission was divinely guided. In verse 50, Bethuel and Laban acknowledge, "This is from the Lord. We can say nothing to you one way or the other." They agree to let Rebekah marry Isaac. However, the next morning, when the servant wishes to leave immediately, Rebekah's family suggests she stay for a few days before departing. To resolve the matter, they ask Rebekah directly if she is willing to go, and she responds, "I will go." Genesis 24:58. Her willingness to leave immediately demonstrates her faith and courage. Rebekah departs with her attendants and Abraham's servant. When they arrive, Isaac is meditating in the field at dusk. Rebekah sees him from afar and asks the servant, "Who is that man in the field coming to meet us?" The servant replies, "He is my master." She dismounts her camel and veils herself, a gesture of respect and modesty. Genesis 24:67 describes their meeting. Isaac brought her into the tent of his mother Sarah, and he married Rebekah. So she became his wife, and he loved her, and Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. This final verse is particularly meaningful, as it highlights that Isaac and Rebekah's marriage was not merely an arranged union, but a relationship marked by love and mutual comfort. This marriage, orchestrated under God's guidance, underscores the central role of divine providence in Isaac's life and family. The union between Isaac and Rebekah sets the stage for the next phase of the story, where they face challenges related to infertility and the birth of their twin sons, Esau and Jacob, whose lives would also be deeply shaped by God's plans. The continuation of Isaac's story involves the birth of his twin sons, Esau and Jacob, and unfolds in a series of events marked by conflict, controversial choices, and the manifestation of God's sovereignty. This part of the narrative is recorded in Genesis 25:27 and reveals the fulfillment of divine plans that would shape the future of Israel. Like Sarah, Rebekah faced challenges in conceiving. Genesis 25:21 states, "Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was childless. The Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. This moment is significant, showcasing Isaac's faith and the importance of intercession. By responding to the prayer, God reaffirms his faithfulness to the promise made to Abraham. During her pregnancy, Rebekah senses that something unusual is happening within her. Verse 22 notes, "The babies jostled each other within her, and she said, 'Why is this happening to me?'" Rebekah seeks the Lord for understanding, and he reveals a prophecy that will shape her sons' destinies. In verse 23, God says, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger." This declaration foreshadows that the twins, though brothers, will take divergent paths and represent nations in conflict. In verse 24, the children are born exactly as God had foretold. The first came out red, all covered with hair, and they named him Esau. Esau was followed by his brother Jacob, who was born holding Esau's heel, as recorded in verse 26. Afterward, his brother came out with his hand holding Esau's heel, so he was named Jacob. The name Jacob means he who grasps, or supplanter, referring to the scene of his birth. Isaac was 60 years old when the boys were born. The Bible records that the brothers grew up with distinct personalities and preferences. Verse 27 states, "The boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man, dwelling in tents." Esau, the firstborn, was loved by Isaac, who enjoyed the wild game Esau brought. On the other hand, Jacob was favored by Rebekah. This divided parental preference would become a source of many future conflicts. One of the most well-known episodes about the twins is Esau selling his birthright to Jacob. In Genesis 25:29-34, the narrative describes Esau returning from the field, exhausted and famished, while Jacob was cooking a stew. Esau, hungry, asks Jacob for some stew, to which Jacob replies, "Sell me your birthright today." Esau, disregarding the spiritual and legal significance of his position as the firstborn, agrees, saying, "Look, I am about to die. What good is the birthright to me?" After swearing an oath, he eats and leaves, showing his disregard for the birthright, as stated in verse 34. This episode reveals a reversal of values. Esau, driven by immediate desire, neglects something of profound spiritual importance, while Jacob, despite his questionable intentions, values the birthright. This exchange sets the stage for subsequent events, including the deception that would occur years later involving Isaac's blessing. As time passed, Isaac grew old and blind, as described in Genesis 27:1. When Isaac was old and his eyes were dim so that he could not see, he called Esau his older son and said to him, "My son." And he answered, "Here I am." Believing his death was near, Isaac decided to bless Esau, asking him to prepare a meal from the wild game he loved. In verse 4, Isaac says, "Prepare for me savory food, such as I love, and bring it to me, that I may eat and bless you before I die." Rebekah, overhearing this conversation, devised a plan to ensure Jacob received the blessing. She instructed Jacob to fetch 2 young goats so she could prepare a tasty dish for Isaac. Jacob, worried about being discovered, argued that Esau was hairy while he had smooth skin. Rebekah, determined, covered Jacob with goat skins and dressed him in Esau's clothes to deceive Isaac. Following his mother's plan, Jacob went to Isaac, pretending to be Esau. Despite some hesitation, Isaac was ultimately convinced by the smell of Esau's clothes and the feel of the goat skins on Jacob's hands. In verse 27, Isaac blessed Jacob, declaring, "May God give you of the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth and plenty of grain and wine. Let peoples serve you and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you." Genesis 27:28-29. Shortly afterward, Esau returned and discovered the deception. Furious, he begged his father for a blessing, but Isaac explained that he had already given everything to Jacob. Esau, filled with bitterness, wept and asked, "Have you not reserved a blessing for me, my father?" Genesis 27:36. Isaac blessed Esau, though in a subordinate position to Jacob, as stated in verse 40. "By your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother. But when you grow restless, you shall break his yoke from your neck." Consumed with anger, Esau resolved to kill Jacob once the mourning for Isaac ended. Rebekah, learning of this, instructed Jacob to flee to her brother Laban's house, saying, "Flee to Laban, my brother in Haran, and stay with him for a while until your brother's fury subsides." Genesis 27:43-44. Jacob's flight marked the beginning of a new chapter in the narrative, where he would undergo his own journey of transformation and encounter with God. However, the conflict with Esau would remain a shadow over his life, awaiting resolution in the future. Isaac's blessing, though obtained deceitfully, was part of God's sovereign plan, which uses even human flaws to accomplish his purposes. Isaac's life among the Philistines is a less highlighted chapter in the Bible, but crucial for understanding his story and God's role in his journey. This period, narrated in Genesis 26, is marked by challenges, conflicts, and, above all, the reaffirmation of divine faithfulness. Isaac's interaction with the Philistines not only reveals his patient and conciliatory character, but also demonstrates how God protects and prospers those who trust in his guidance. Genesis 26 opens with a crisis. Now there was a famine in the land, besides the former famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines, in Gerar. Genesis 26:1. The famine forced Isaac to seek resources elsewhere, as Abraham had done earlier. However, before Isaac decided to go to Egypt, God appeared to him and gave clear instructions. In verse 2, God said, "Do not go down to Egypt, dwell in the land of which I shall tell you." God commanded Isaac to stay in Gerar, reaffirming the promise made to Abraham. In verse 3, God declares, "Stay in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. For to you and your descendants I will give all these lands, and will confirm the oath I swore to Abraham your father." He also reinforces the covenant, promising to multiply Isaac's descendants as the stars of the heavens, and to bless all nations through them, as he had promised to Abraham. This renewal of the covenant not only reassures Isaac, but also demonstrates the continuity of God's plan, regardless of adverse circumstances. Isaac obeys and remains in Gerar, but soon faces a familiar challenge: the fear that the inhabitants of the region might kill him because of the beauty of his wife Rebekah. Verse 7 recounts that Isaac said, "She is my sister," fearing for his life, just as his father Abraham had done regarding Sarah. This action reflects the influence of Abraham's example, but also reveals Isaac's human weaknesses, as he succumbs to fear despite his faith. Isaac's lie is exposed when Abimelech, king of the Philistines, observes Isaac caressing Rebekah and realizes she is indeed his wife. Confronting Isaac, Abimelech declares, "Surely she is your wife. How then could you say, 'She is my sister'?" Genesis 26:9. Isaac admits his fear, and Abimelech decrees protection for him and Rebekah, forbidding anyone from harming them. Despite this rocky start, God's presence with Isaac is evident. He begins to prosper extraordinarily. Verse 12 states, "Isaac planted crops in that land, and the same year reaped 100-fold, because the Lord blessed him." Isaac becomes very wealthy, acquiring flocks, herds, and servants to the point where the Philistines envy him. This envy leads to hostile actions. The Philistines fill in the wells that Abraham had dug, cutting off Isaac's access to water, a vital resource in the region. Abimelech, seeing Isaac's growing power, asks him to leave Gerar. "Move away from us. You have become too powerful for us." Genesis 26:16. Instead of responding with hostility, Isaac chooses peace and moves to the valley of Gerar. He reopens the wells that Abraham had dug, but opposition arises again. In verse 20, the herders of Gerar dispute the first well, naming it Esek, meaning quarrel. When Isaac digs another well, the contention continues, and he names it Sitnah, meaning hostility. Genesis 26:21. Finally, Isaac digs a third well, and this time there is no dispute. He names it Rehoboth, meaning room, saying, "Now the Lord has given us room, and we will flourish in the land." Genesis 26:22. This moment marks a period of peace and consolidation for Isaac, showing that God was with him even in adversity. After settling in Rehoboth, Isaac moves to Beersheba, where the Lord appears to him again. In verse 24, God declares, "I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. I will bless you and will increase your descendants for the sake of my servant Abraham." In response, Isaac builds an altar, calls on the name of the Lord, and pitches his tent, solidifying his presence in the region. At this point, Abimelech, accompanied by Phicol, the commander of his army, comes to Isaac to propose a treaty. Recognizing that God is with Isaac, Abimelech says, "We saw clearly that the Lord was with you, so we said, there ought to be a sworn agreement between us and you. Let us make a treaty with you." Genesis 26:28. Isaac agrees, and they celebrate with a feast, establishing a pact of peace that symbolizes the acknowledgement of God's blessing and protection over Isaac. This period of Isaac's life among the Philistines is a testament to God's faithfulness. He provides for Isaac during a famine, prospers him in a foreign land, guides him toward peaceful conflict resolution, and reaffirms his covenant. Isaac, in turn, displays patience, humility, and faith, qualities that continue to shape his journey and his family, setting the stage for the events involving his sons and the legacy he would leave. Isaac's life extends into old age, and his final days are marked by events that not only conclude his story, but also solidify his role as one of the patriarchs of God's covenant. Isaac lived to the age of 180, and his longevity allowed him to witness the unfolding lives of his sons, Esau and Jacob, as well as the continuity of the divine promise he inherited from Abraham. In Genesis 27, Isaac, now blind and believing his death is near, plays a central role in one of the most well-known events of his life, the blessing of his sons. As the patriarch, it was his responsibility to pass on the divine blessing, a gesture with both spiritual and material implications. However, this blessing becomes the focus of conflict between Esau and Jacob. Although Jacob had already obtained Esau's birthright in exchange for a bowl of lentils, Isaac's blessing would be a public and solemn confirmation of the spiritual and material inheritance. When Isaac decides to bless Esau, he sends his elder son to hunt and prepare a tasty meal. However, Rebekah, favoring Jacob, instructs him to deceive his father by posing as Esau to receive the blessing. Following his mother's plan, Jacob dons Esau's clothes and covers his arms with goatskins to mimic his brother's rough skin. Despite initial hesitation, Isaac is convinced and blesses Jacob, saying, "May God give you heaven's dew and earth's richness, an abundance of grain and new wine. May nations serve you and peoples bow down to you. Be lord over your brothers, and may the sons of your mother bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you be blessed." Genesis 27:28-29. Shortly after, Esau returns and discovers the deception. He cries out bitterly, but Isaac, though shaken, affirms that the blessing has been irrevocably given to Jacob. In verse 33, Isaac declares, "I blessed him, and indeed he will be blessed." Esau receives a secondary blessing, foretelling a future of struggle and subservience to Jacob. This event creates a lasting enmity between the brothers. Esau plans to kill Jacob, But Rebekah intervenes and sends Jacob to her brother Laban's house in Haran, instructing him to stay there until Esau's anger subsides. This conflict between the sons deeply impacts Isaac's final years, as he likely suffered from witnessing the division within his family. The Bible provides little detail about Isaac's later years, but it is clear that he continued to live in Canaan and remained a central figure in the lineage of the divine covenant. In Genesis 28, before Jacob departs for Haran, Isaac blesses him again, this time fully aware of his identity. He says, "May God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and increase your numbers until you become a community of peoples. May he give you and your descendants the blessing given to Abraham, so that you may take possession of the land where you now reside as a foreigner, the land God gave to Abraham." Genesis 28, 3-4. This blessing demonstrates that Isaac recognized Jacob's role in continuing the divine promise and accepted God's plan, even though the events leading to this moment were marked by deceit and conflict. This acceptance reflects Isaac's faith and understanding that God's covenant transcends human weaknesses. Isaac lived long enough to see Esau establish his own family and settle in the land of Seir. Esau became the ancestor of the Edomites, a people who would have a complex relationship with Jacob's descendants. Nevertheless, his lineage prospered, fulfilling God's promise to Abraham that both Ishmael and Esau would become fathers of great nations. Meanwhile, Isaac also witnessed Jacob's return from Haran with a large family and substantial wealth, following a reconciliation with Esau in a moment of grace and forgiveness. The reunion of Jacob and Esau in Genesis 33 serves as a resolution in their family narrative. Although Isaac is not directly mentioned in this chapter, he likely felt the impact of this reconciliation. In Genesis 35, Isaac's final days are briefly described. He lived in Hebron, where Abraham had resided, and remained the patriarch until his death. Verse 28 records, "Isaac lived 180 years." Verse 29 honors his death. "Then Isaac breathed his last and died, and was gathered to his people, old and full of years, and his sons Esau and Jacob buried him." The joint presence of Esau and Jacob at Isaac's burial testifies that despite their conflicts, the family retained some unity and respect for patriarchal bonds. Isaac's legacy is significant, even though his story contains fewer dramatic events compared to Abraham or Jacob. He is remembered as the link that preserved the divine covenant and ensured the continuity of the chosen lineage. His life reflects the power of obedience, patience, and submission to God's will, even amid family conflicts and adversities. With Isaac's death, the narrative of the patriarchs transitions to the next generation, where Jacob, now bearing Isaac's blessing and God's promise, becomes the central figure. The events that follow mark Jacob's transformation into Israel, a name representing struggle, faith, and the heritage of a people descended from his 12 tribes, fulfilling the divine plan initiated with Abraham and carried forward by Isaac. Thus, we reach the conclusion of the remarkable story of Isaac, one of the most important patriarchs in the Bible. From his miraculous birth as the child of promise to the sacrifice on Mount Moriah and the challenges and blessings that defined his life, we see that God's faithfulness never fails. Isaac's story teaches us about obedience, patience, and trusting a God who always keeps his promises, even in the most challenging circumstances. If you enjoyed exploring this journey with us, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so you won't miss any upcoming videos. We're always bringing inspiring Bible stories and reflections that can transform lives. Share this video with your friends and family so that more people can learn about Isaac's story and the examples of faith and perseverance he left us. Leave your comment, sharing what impacted you the most about this story. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.